Martians, Earthlings, anyone else listening in? Alpha Johnny Earth 2017 calling for a return to 4D, please. Marco Discloso Polo walks into camp. He's connected back in Europe. He's financed. He's got a couple of guides with him. He's friendly and well-spoken. He talks to the guards in their camp. He mingles and travels along with the tribe. He's allowed to inspect the diamond and gold mines and just basically make himself at home in the whole area. And he does this, but he's not a happy man. He's already aware of what's going on in the world to a much larger degree than anyone else around at this time. But what he sees on his way into this part of the world, the massive destruction of ancient old world creatures, structures, carvings, and all of it, has him really upset now. He already knew this kind of thing was going on because of, in particular, one incident back in his town where a giant statue, very famous giant statue carving, or perhaps an actual preserved real creature from ancient times, had been destroyed. It was a giant bull. It was a huge reptilian dinosaur. Something he had been fully aware of when he was a child was now gone. And just a few years later, as he's grown up, it was denied that it had ever existed. Well, his family being historians, himself and his father before him, they were rather upset by this, and they had no love lost between themselves and the empire. Of course, you couldn't voice such opinions in these times. Just to keep this real, keep this in mind. When the empire wants something to go away down on the ground, it does, and that includes all records of it. And anybody more than a few hundred miles away from it would only know of it as a legend anyway. So you can see how history is complete bunk. There's nothing that you can count on being left behind that hasn't been changed. Yeah, disclosure. Fun, huh? Yeah, I'm just casually rewrite all of history for you and say, what next? We'll figure it out. Like the exploding planet and what Mars is and all of it, it's only a matter of time, because these psionic records are out there. You're listening to one now, and they will come back around eventually, so I hope everybody has the patience, in maybe a few hundred years for that, the way it feels anyway. Let's go back to the river with Marco Discloso, who meets with the tribe and starts explaining what the hell is going on in the world. At this point, the tribe don't even really know what that is up in the sky there. They haven't connected it to the empire and their fate. Well, when they find out that it is not, in fact, a witch on her broomstick up there, which is their legend, there's in fact some kind of a craft from which two large people are known to come down from occasionally, and which has this long worm-like shape floating up there next to it, a creature that they've now seen once or twice, or experienced, or heard about for the first time. Well, time to start looking up, and figuring out what's going on here. Yeah, witch on her broomstick, the worm in the anti-grav field has the saucer and hovers over the ocean. In Mum's youth, we cut to a brief memory of Mum's in Africa, looking up and going, there it is, it's a witch on her broomstick, from certain angles, but they're not really sure what it is. There may be other legends. Whereas, back in Rome, and other places, there's this almost hypnotic love and interest in whatever this great preacher, him, has to say. Okay? So it may look like there's all these power structures and powerful characters around in the world, but none of them make much of a move of any kind without a reason, okay, via some instructions. So people are not like movies at all in these times. They're not running around trying to start wars. There's none of this craziness except for the odd fanatical, type connected to something like the Empire, who'll do ridiculous, crazy, aggressive, violent things. Otherwise, people are not naturally that way. Like I say, just the odd fanatic and the humanoids are the ones that cause the most trouble in the history of this planet. No contest. Been invisible most of history, being denied forever. Off the planet now, largely, or under control. But not to be denied. ET's here, yes. Advanced enough to mess with human genetics, yes. Do they make some controllable humanoids? Of course they do. So who do we have in this adventure for sure? It's one of them. Well, it's Dora. Well, I don't like carving rocks much, I can do it, but I just like to sit and think, or whatever, enjoy myself. She's the ringer. Metallic brain content or not, just conditioned to it or chosen for it. I imagine that if ET's away for a couple of weeks or months or is off planet, and come back, and anything that's happened in the main central group of the tribe, Dora will just be sitting there watching it and taking it in. E.T. can come straight back and read it from her mind. Or one of the guards, maybe one of the locals. No way to tell, but that's how it's done. Human beings as observation posts, right? And we've seen from the way these stories go that we can switch to Mom or Cece or just when it's Dora, you don't know who you are, right? You're just seeing the whole scene. So she's the central ET ringer, okay, in this whole adventure. I'm way off topic now. We wanted to zoom in on Marco Polo here and what he really brought to the mix, which was frightening amount of history and information stretching back over the last thousands or 2 years. Certainly back to the year zero, he seemed to know everything. Okay, how? Well, the great libraries had been destroyed. His was a historian family. They had kept some records. His father had records. He had records that he was afraid to show to people. Okay, it's pretty much like a movie here in terms of the tension of the characters involved. Now, even though Marco Polo's well off and knows he won't be probably targeted or enslaved or anything like that, he certainly can't go around expressing these opinions and stuff without being, attacked and told to be quiet. And not in some imaginary gangster way like today, just right openly in front of everybody in the town square. If you wanted to argue with these people, it was fatal. Okay, and nobody doubted that. So again, there's some sense of honor amongst people, and they didn't just have these mindless fights for no reason. But when it came down to it, certain things were allowed and other things weren't. End of story. So here's Marco Polo with this information. Specifically, he started showing her and telling her and sketching the history of the empire, which he said had been changed drastically since he was a child. They'd done a whole different look and doing different things. And he said going back through the centuries that his father had the records from that had been salvaged before one of these great libraries was destroyed and were being hidden somewhere. Or were probably later found. We don't know. This empire just gets wilder the further back you go, and the helmet styles get crazier, a lot bigger and more protective, with a great big crest on the top, so you can't be hit on the top of the head very well. And then they have a huge fan down the back, 2 feet sticking out. We learn that's to protect from attack from flying insects and from above, insectoids or reptilian creatures of some kind. Way back you have reptilian faces in the helmets. They look like brutal, early ape-like humanoid forms. Okay, so it gets really crazy going back through the wars of Earth, because there are reptilians involved and there are insectoids on top of the whole show all along. Sorry. And, geez, helmet styles. Just wow. I mean, he describes them to her, and she starts getting them in there. She's becoming fully aware now of what's going on in the world, how they're very important people, and, maybe the only ones who have a chance to leave a record. So it's like I said, this material was put in a place and meant to stay there for an indeterminate time past the lifetime of anyone involved with this. Okay? They knew they were done for. Okay? So it's a disclosure group, no two ways about it. It consists of Mom and the others who understood what was going on and got it into the rock record, and have a chance to survive, and concealed it, and it's Marco Polo bringing this into the second part of which was more just general historic events. And this is where I'm angry about all the stuff that's happened in between this time when we learned this stuff and now, where parts of this memory have been just hazed out on me. He shows her historic events going right back to the year zero. And before we get there, she's interested and asks, why did they start at year zero? It's a good question, huh? And I'm sure you could look up some version of what it means. But no, in those days, he said, well, after that great cataclysm, that horrible, terrible, whatever it was the last big destructive event on the earth. So that might be one of two things, no matter what you're hearing out there of wars and so forth. There's either one big, gigantic explosion that reduces the earth to a state of, and I hate to say how recent this could be, reduces it to a primitive state. And then a returning hunk of the same explosion, obviously. And that could be your secondary cataclysm. Okay? Either one of those events could have caused this crystallized area of the world that we're looking at, or it could have been caused deliberately by E.T. using those volcanoes. Okay? Tightly controlled. There's a couple of ways you can think about that being done. It's just like the exploding planet next door, which I detailed in an early video, and everyone ignores because it's just like, okay, well, we'll wait to see if that's true. Of course it's true. How else could there be such a big explosion in this solar system? Never mind that. Let's go back to the river and Marco Polo, showing her all these great historic events, explaining why year zero, showing different last battles with reptilians, last battle with the giant insect forms. Spectacular stuff. Unbelievable, 10 times as exciting as any Earth history, and better than most high-end sci-fi movies, and a lot longer and more complex and weirder, with wild creatures. You'd think they were cartoon characters. Some of the early human beings, they're just so basic looking, and all different head shapes. Okay, that's what's been done away with. Those who are different than us, right? That's a whole other story that ties in with what animals, all the other animals, the other few 100,000 types of animals and creatures on this planet besides ourselves that we take for granted. Us here at the top of the food chain. Now we are. We used to be third. And enough about that. Back to the river. The tribe living outside every single day. Marco Polo comes along. Well, he travels along with them. Probably has a little tent he can set up. And is a civilized guy. And is a main player here. And he's the guy we have to thank for making sure that all of this other intel that the tribe wasn't aware of, historic events, which are going to be Moses and or this king or that, and like I said, the last time this happened or that happened. Okay, lots of famous stuff mixed in with all the Cleopatra stories that the tribe are carving, and St. George and the Dragon, and Rapunzel and Cinderella, and probably a dozen others. Marco Polo imparts maybe 24 significant major historic events occurring in the year 1050, 567, and in 823. Okay? All of this stuff is going to be dead accurate, and it's going to, because it's coming from the Dark Ages, effectively, which is when the massive overwrite occurred. Well, it's pretty simple. Everything you know is wrong. Not your fault. Back to the river we go. Differences between today and then, just to try to give more feel to how crazy this world was, even though by now we have very much non-awareness of any insectoid or reptilian forms running the planet. They're supposed to be in the past by now. But up there we have controlling ET presence, thought to be these two humans, one of which is supposed to be a devilish figure with a horn on the back of the neck, or is it on top of the head? We're not even sure. Maybe Marco Polo's not even sure. He's probably never seen this preacher character himself. So already the legend of the horned male devil is around, and of course the worm is Quetzalcoatl snake and any other. Look to India for a lot of the early stuff, by the way. So I remember from a different psionic memory that at the time of the original cataclysm, right around there, and all of their legends that have survived are the closest to how wild and crazy it really was, with all the flying vehicles, just for starters, flying vehicles, anti-grav type stuff. Well, with the binary planet there, the gravity of this planet was significantly less. The magnetic field of the two planets together was completely different, and we had high-end ET technology here, and visitors of theirs, right? And reptilians here as well. How much of this does Marco Polo know? Yeah. He certainly knows about insectoids and reptilians and great wars with same, as recently as the year 0 or, post that time period. Hard to grasp how short, how foreshortened history is, and how much of this dramatic ET evidence that people keep coming up with might be. Excuse me. Hard to talk about that without someone there and argue with about it, because it doesn't deny that in the year 10,000 BC something completely else was going on. Personally, I think 10,000 BC, there's still wars. Straight back to then. That's when. Then, 12,000 BC, that's when we have our crazy cataclysm, not too far. But that's a whole other giant talk, an argument with everybody. Because I don't believe, human being spursions. Written for us all along. We're on the river. What's different? Well, not much. Mom's out one day pulling in a fishing net or carving a rock or something, and a few people sitting back at the camp. A black cloud appears in the sky coming from the north. What is it? Well, it's insects, and they get close really fast. Now they're coming down the river at her. She starts back for camp, but no, a couple of them get there, and they're big, and they zoom down and sting her, and she yells, and everyone at the camp jumps up and looks, and they're attacked, and a big swarm of hundreds of these giant black flies come right through the camp, and people are screaming and running in circles and jumping up and down, and the guards head for their tent, and the tribe starts throwing sand and rocks in the air and burning logs, and for 50 minutes straight they fight these things off and are trying to dig into the sand and hide anywhere they can. Finally, they're burning green branches, and this huge insect swarm moves off down the river, looking for easier prey. So very serious event in these days. And why are these 2-inch long monster deer, horsefly type creatures attacking in numbers like this in a big swarm? Because turns out life's pretty alive in these days, and there's great numbers of birds that will. There's hawks and there's many eagles, and all of them native headdresses have many types of incredible feathers. But there's insect-eating birds that are fast and numerous, and they will wipe out any lower concentrations of these giant black flies, so they band together for protection. And just a bit different than today. What else would be different? I mentioned the yellowish sun, but something you don't see everywhere today is sinkholes that might just suddenly open under your feet of any size, or a trap dug by somebody covered with branches and leaves, maybe for an animal, but you never know. Quicksand, stuff like this. So that's why you carry a stick everywhere you go, a walking stick, even if you don't need it, maybe 4 or 5 feet long, like a cane with a rock on the end. And you probably have a hook on one side of that rock, cutting or hammer surface on the other. But you might be able to pull yourself out of a sinkhole or a trap with that stick with the hook on the end. So, that's a little different than today. Meteorites falling. Ones you can see flashing at maybe not at such a high altitude, that would just land all around. Look, a bunch of black meteorites just came down. Oh, let's get those. They'll make great little tools for jewelry, and they do. A heavy iron content. Here's one here. And that happened weekly or monthly. You'd see a few meteorites, so still parts of whatever was up there coming down more frequently than today, logically. However, a big fireball being shot out of a volcano, that's a little different. It happens one afternoon when everyone's on the beach. Boom, there it goes. A big ball of fire down the river. Looks like it's coming down less than a mile away. Mom and Cece jump up, commandeer a guard. Let's go get that. That'll be the best tools ever. Okay, and they head across the river and down, and they find it. Maybe an hour later, it's less than a mile away, but it's huge and heavy. Rock, 5 feet high, 6 feet around, lumpy, roundish shape, and it's cooling still. And it's green and black stripes with a bit of gray in there, so, right, as it's cooling. Well, they can't break it already. It's too hard, so they have to go back and get the 2 strongest, biggest guards with the biggest sledgehammers and bring them back to this rock and smash it up and make tools out of it for the next weeks or months. Right, carving. We're in the vaudeville of rock carving here, just to make an analogy. Every trick there is, every type of rock, every type of substance you can apply to a rock. Which brings us to something that you don't see every day now. Liquid crystal pools, ponds of crunchy liquid crystal. The first one they encounter is just in the woods a ways, and Cece wanders in there and wades into this pond of blackish looking, glistening mud. And she scoops up a handful, and it just trickles through her fingers and down and goes crackle crunch. And she turns, and you see her saying, "The water is crystal." And it is. So Mom takes a bowl of this stuff immediately back up to camp and to the beach, and puts it down and starts working on some carvings, and smears a bit of this stuff on a rock and puts it up in the wind, and sure enough, an hour or two later, it's dry, hard rock, crystal black colored rock. Well, they come across green, and then some light colored, tan, whitish colored rock crystal pools, depending on what part of the area you're in, right? This stuff is glitter paint of the time and is used as such. And there's carvings around the camp, big ones of people and stuff, all of a sudden with these glittery eyeballs and features on them. But it's vaguely discouraged that they get too out of hand with this stuff. So right away, Mom figures out that what this is really good for is just covering, hiding stuff. And she starts smearing it, over half of a carving that she's just done that might be fairly intricate and have some writing on it that maybe these guards will start to recognize as a bunch of writing, even if they can't read it. And so she's smearing it on everything and trying it out and using it to disguise in a lot of cases, right? Which you can also do with plain ordinary mud. Put that up, let it dry hard, throw it in the pile. Well, it'll be there 100 years later, 1,000 years later. Okay? You can do the same thing with berry juice. You can do the same thing with human blood. You can do the same thing with bird droppings. Okay? Just for starters. You got all of those. Multicolored glitter paint. Maybe grind up a little bit of iron pyrite and get some gold chips in there and just arrange them just like you would a fine little piece of jewelry or something, So they're actually the stuff that's missing. I mean, I'm talking about this rock, but the top 1,000 carvings that they did would be gone at the time, right? Someone would take them. They'd be really broken to bits because they were leaving or something, right? So, but they realized quickly that this was what was going on and went, well, there's no point in doing all of these great carvings for these people around here. They're just going to take them, right? So just get it all into the piles, as small as it has to be, as whatever as it has to be, because eventually somebody will come along and go, hey, there's not just one, there's not just 100, there's thousands of these things. What were they trying to say, right? What was going on? And it'll be figured out, and the evil empire, and that thing up in the sky that nobody quite understands, will be exposed, and maybe that'll help defeat them someday after after what they went and did to us, to everybody in this adventure. And you got to figure these guard characters and these empire types, they're not going anywhere. They might live decent lives and everything, but they're not allowed to talk. They have to be, subservient all the time. So most, good percentage of them didn't go along with this, but it's just like being in the Nazi army, except it's everywhere. It's everywhere in the world, and it's taken for granted. Okay. Now, since everybody knows that, it's more relaxed than if it would be an actual war all the time like we had during the Second War, right? So it's a very strange mindset. Again, I tell you, it's a certain numbness at the same time as being more alive. Really hard to grasp, and that's why I keep telling this story, as I feel like I'm there. So much of it is normal feeling and intelligent feeling. Like I say, the vaudeville of rock carving. These are fun, clever people. Now they've got glitter paint. Sky's the limit. They're having fun. Pies 3. And now they're just going to give him his first carving lesson. We get to see this right over the shoulder of Mom, who's teaching him, right? Why do we have these nice, pleasant little family, personalized memories from 18? Well, it's because the whole show is theirs, and they watch it all to see what you do, and they might even reward or punish certain people if they... So gods and devils and at the same time? Kinda, yeah. They're really just the top of the food chain, and we're not quite, so they're playing games on a high intellectual level, which is where they are. Very interested in us and very much feeding on emotions, like you can hear many people testify to. Once you have some entity like that at the top of the food chain, all below it fall into line, like it or not. So there we are, being part of this. And we're teaching young Pi to carve a rock at age 3. They're showing him, saying, look at that mountain over there with the 3 peaks. One on the right has that little fang point on it. There, see, let's carve that here. Here's one that looks like a chip. Okay, now you see that line that goes up, that's path that goes all the way up from left to right. They put a rock here and go hit. And you try it on this rock, which is kind of the same. Okay, first carving lesson. By the time he's 5, he's doing various things, and when he's 7, he's proudly carving number 7s everywhere and doing all kinds of stuff. He can do the clinging hand himself by then, probably. Okay? The clinging hand. That'll just take us into story rocks, which is a big part of this that I left out. First of all, there's teaching rocks for the kids, and this is important because they're going to learn everything about Africa. All the animals and what the land is and all of it. They're going to have to name the top dozen animals. That's Mr. Gorilla. Yes, where does he live? What does he eat? What color? What does he sound like? How does he jump around? This is an elephant, Hard for these kids to believe in elephants and giraffes and all of these creatures, some of them, if you can believe it. And here we are being restricted from carving elephants and rhinos and certain creatures, and they have to hide it. But they continuously make these little story rocks with 4 animal heads on each and turn them and say, that's a gorilla, that's right. And this is a chimpanzee, and that's a mandrill. Okay, and here's a different type. Okay, with the higher, all very accurate, all with names and all the characteristics and everything. Probably knowing more about those creatures than the kids do today in that same part of the world. Wouldn't surprise me. Okay? Teaching rocks. So they can double as toys because you got Mr. Shark and Mr. Lion and Mr. Gorilla. You can do all kinds of stories with those. So Pi loves stories. He's screaming out for them every night. And eventually he gets to where he wants some of the more adult stories. Well, story rocks might be 3, 4, 5 or more in a story. And there might be generic other types of rocks sitting nearby. But you put the 5 rocks on your ankle or maybe on your arm, your wrist. And so you could just sit there and pick them up one at a time and put them back down. And for that reason, any serious story rocks had a nice curve, a U-shaped curve on the back. So you could just set it on your arm or any curved surface. And it wouldn't fall off. So you might tell the clinging hand story, or all the stories from Africa that I mentioned, some of them, and all of the Nubian legends and stuff that they had in their repertoire. Or you might, especially if people were coming in that were new to the area, which happened for the longest time. Groups of 5 and 10 came in and were sent out and came back and so forth. Well, you wouldn't want to be telling them the same old stories from Africa now that they were here in the new land. So our first group that came in learned some new stories, and they learned them from basically from the chief of the local tribe, the nearby tribe. And they're based around the mountain, which was sitting there smoking away and shaking the ground every now and then, about 2 miles away, while you're telling this story to some new, tired, big glassy-eyed guys and gals that have come in after making this incredible trek across the ocean and then North America to get here. Say, well, you've been here a couple of days now, you're going to head up on that mountain soon, and there's a real good story about that mountain up there and that diamond mine. And you pull out your 5 rocks and put them on your leg and you say, this story here is called The Clinging Hand. And it's about the mightiest and the greatest rock climber that ever lived. And his name was Klingahauntis. And he could climb up places like a human fly where nobody had ever gone. And he had serious problems. He was very depressed. He was a slave who worked in the diamond mine. It looked like he was never going to get away and get back to his home down south where he was from. Now he could show a rock with a native character on it with a big hand, or anything you wanted here to introduce him. And you could show him climbing or something. Not necessary, you could just tell the story and wait key moments. Anyway, Klingahauntis was so depressed that he was going to kill himself. And he thought up a desperate plan, a last-ditch effort that he could make. And he told it to his tribe mates there, and he said, look, I'm going to try to climb into the diamond mine and steal the diamond. Then I'll be able to buy my way out of this area of the world. With a diamond, you could get all the way out of the area. Otherwise, there was no chance to escape from this entire area of the world. It was only two ways out of there, and they were heavily guarded. Many had tried, many had died. Not even Klingohanis could climb out of this area. But he thought he could climb into that diamond mine. Well, everyone laughed, said, no, not even giant ape could climb up in there. The biggest humans from the old days of Earth couldn't climb up in there. A 300-foot snake couldn't get up into there, Klingohanis. You're dreaming. No, he says, I've noticed a seam up there. He says, and I'm going to try to climb up there, or else I'm going to just give up, you know. I think I might have a chance to do it. And everyone thinks he's crazy, but off he goes. And up that mountain they climb with him till they can't go any further, but he does. And he scales up past where any man has been before, and now he's approaching the edge of this huge diamond mine. And all through this story, you can be pointing up at the mountain there, which might be smoking, and people can see this point. But there's also this big, round, smooth bowl shape surrounding the whole area and keeping people out. And of course, you can't go up the ramp to get in there without being seen and coming a half-mile away, and then they have you trapped in there. It's guarded all the time, and it's hopeless. So climbing in there is also thought to be impossible. But there he is, 50 feet away from the edge of this thing. Nobody can believe he's hanging on vertically 90 degrees or more, and he suddenly moves up within 15 or 20 feet of this place. Everyone's holding their breath. The people listening to you tell this story with rocks holding their breath. And no, he can't move. He hangs there minute after minute, and they're watching him, and they're betting he's not going to make it. Well, to everyone's astonishment, he suddenly moves forward like Spider-Man up and around this cornice bowl that surrounds this thing. And he's got his hand, one mighty hand is up on the top lip of this bowl. All he has to do is pull himself up, and he's there, right? Again, he hangs minute after minute. I mean, you could stretch the story out to half an hour. And then just as he starts to pull himself up, they see him start to move. Of course, the mountain decides to shoot out a burst of flame and smoke, and the whole area disappears in a cloud of smoke and ashes and cinders, and everyone has to cower and hide and run down the mountain. Well, they come back hours or maybe the next day later when it's safe, and they can't see him up there. And they climb up to where they're as high as they can go, and they look closely, and he's not there, but his hand still is, and it's still clinging right to that top edge of that bowl-shaped rock. And there's a bit of his arm there too, and just a bit of bone, white bone sticking out from that arm, and one drop of red blood on the end of that bone. And it's all turned to rock crystal, and it's still up there now. And everyone jumps and looks up, and then you can say, and you'll be going up there before long. What's that thing up there? I don't know. Geez, the memory you see of it is pretty wild. You actually see this guy burning up and just his hand staying there, and E.T. is going, oh, there's just enough firepower to make this happen. Climb into my diamond mine, will you? The way they tell this story, so graphic and visual, you know, that it's hard to tell whose viewpoint you're seeing it from and whether you're actually seeing it, right? Just like another legend that I'm showing from up there, this time from the gold mine, again, of a slave who's had enough and is going to risk his life to escape, no matter what. This is in the gold mine. He's in there with some other people. Apparently the guards are going to come and change them or something, or take him away, and they know he thinks he's going to be killed or something. He's going crazy. What he's done is he's taken everyone's clothes and any bit of cloth and anything he can find, and he's woven together this rope, and it's quite long now, but everyone tells him it's not nearly long enough to reach down to the ground. He says, I don't care, it's all or nothing, I'm not letting them take me, I'm going out that cave mouth there and down. He ties it rope to a rock, and he climbs down it as fast as he can. He lowers himself down, and he gets down to the end, and he's hanging by his arms, and he's not close enough. He's 40, 50 feet up, and he's just going to hang there till his arms give out and die. Well, at this point in this particular memory, suddenly we see this guy from above, and we're coming down towards him, and we never see who we are or what type of creature we are in this particular visual, but our guy is lowered down to the ground, and we see him from quite high above running off into this crazy landscape. We see the three mountains smoking away to the left, and just the landscape spreading all out around. There's early types of humans and non-human creatures around. Just a really bizarre landscape. If you could see that one shot of the Earth, you'd think, what planet is that? It's that strange, who lowered our guy down to the ground? Well, angels or harpies, your choice. Or, just E.T. himself, just saying, oh well, for bravery, or for a reward for being so brave and stupid, I'll let you live and run free, right? Which is the dream of anyone. I mean, he might have run into a giant creature 5 minutes later, for all we know, but at least he got his freedom, right? Stuff like this, that story will just scare the hell out of people listening to it at night, around the fire, in this strange land with this mountain over there shaking the ground like you've never seen before, and these weird empire types, and this realization coming along that there's this craft up there that has these people in it who you don't know what they're anything about, So, no need for artificial entertainment of any kind. Of course, the story rocks could provide that. They tell you about Cleopatra, which people would assume was, accurate, and probably was. Whatever actually happened to be a lot closer to the story they tell now. I can't bring that back specifically. I mean, I wish I'd got this all down and recorded earlier, when I could remember it better, but of course I didn't remember it at all, except for, 8 or 10 incidents of it that came back a number of years ago as part of the whole process that I just filed away. I went, well, starting with that cataclysm, actually on the ground seeing that happen is kind of like, okay, all right, nobody's making that up and showing it to me as part of any LSD experiment or anything, which is another talk in itself. What was done with that substance, right? A crystalline liquid substance created to, take the mind elsewhere. Well, no escape for these people in drugs, but they had them, and they show up one day at the local camp. Some recreational peace pipe is smoked. There, few of the tribe are visiting it. I believe it's Mom and Cece, and of course Dora's there, just quietly watching. 5 or 6 of the women and a guard are allowed to just wander off to the local First Nations camp, which is, 15 minutes away from the river somewhere. And they walk into camp. First thing you see is the big conical pyramid teepee. And Mom goes, aha, that's how they do it. Regarding the rain, because this thing will shed rain perfectly, can be closed with one tug on a rope. It's got a little fire inside. Chief is sitting outside at this time, a nice sunny day. You get to see over his shoulder a few different views of him painting on birch bark. Very talented He's doing animals and landscapes, just different parts of the forest and the river and so forth. Very good. Can't imagine where that stuff is today or who it's attributed to or what it's meant to represent. Because of course they would paint the saucer and all kinds of other stuff. You can just bet that somebody's taken out, any of it that couldn't be misinterpreted right along the way, all over the world. Just didn't miss a trick, and you can see how this works by, just to digress, what happens to all of this incredible crystalline rock that's all over the area? Wow, the Empire's taking out any real big gems, big emeralds, really valuable stuff by the bagload. Not just down from the mountain where everybody carries down what they cut out, big heavy loads of gold that are squared off and weighed very precisely and loaded onto wagons and sent on canoes off across North America by the Empire, and great big bags of jewels which are taken the same way, and sealed up and all counted and but laying around this part of the world are ridiculous amounts, tens, thousands of variations of semi-precious stuff. Digress again to the caterpillar. The light green jade-like material is one form that's left around, along with the soapstone, and this is done by Mrs. E.T. again at the end, saying, well, we have enough bags of jewels and weights of gold and everything else that we wanted. Just leave the soapstone and the other green stuff, some of which is this caterpillar that we see somewhere near our Magic Valley. The men are in the woods, and we see a guard walking around this thing going, what is this? It's as tall as he is. It's 5 or 6 bloody feet tall, made of green, semi-translucent, all different variations of it. 6 or 8 feet across, 20 feet long or longer. It's some kind of caterpillar, centipede, insectoid, giant, huge pre-cataclysm Earth life form. Okay, crystallized into this green stuff and glistening away, but you can still see where its eyes and antenna and legs and body and all of it, and its mouth it's just like it's there. Okay, well, they have to smash this thing to bits, but it takes a couple of hours using the sledgehammers and throwing huge boulders on it and stuff, because they're told, smash these things right up. Don't leave any of the giant insect life forms. Cut the heads off the reptiles or any insects that have that sort of head, big enough, and separate them. But something like this, just a gigantic life form in the woods, it was just smashed to a million pieces, but it was this semi-translucent, greenish, semi-precious, jade-like material. Well, after this area of the world is more or less not deserted, but the Empire pulls out, the tribe is gone, the mine is closed down, the gold mine is finished, and so forth. Sure enough, within a year or two of this, a group of Asian people show up all of a sudden, and they've been directed there from their part of the world, no doubt in some ET-connected way, to come up here and said, you want that green stuff? There's quite a hoard of it. And here, to get up there, you'll need these very exact directions, and you'll need cooperation from the natives and everything to get in there, right? But they do. A team of them shows up and sweeps through that area with a fine-tooth comb, and they just carry out boatloads of this stuff. Meanwhile, the quality soapstone, of which there's even more, is being is made available for the first time to the First Nations people up there in unbelievable quantities. Everyone's gone. They can go into this area and say, oh, look what they've left, for us. So that was the first big sweep on this area. That would have cleared out a lot of really great stuff. Okay? And given our piles here an even better chance the next time someone came around. It's like, oh, well, they've been through here and chosen all the best pieces. And look, they've left these piles of rubbish on the beach where they've gouged everything out. There's no point in going through there if it's already been... You see how perfect it turned out for us? You know? Only 600, well, less than 600 years, Mom. And you've made it. You know, you're going to be a rock star. And she is. She's one of the greatest carvers, possibly of all time. And this is proved. This proves out when the Pope shows up with plaster. Now, this is a ways down the river. He's coming back maybe the third or fourth time. Everybody knows about Josie. Even back in Rome, they're fairly aware that this tribe has been taken and is over there, and all this work is being done with soldiers who go back and forth. You know, they get to go home to Rome once a year or something for a month. And, you know, not allowed to talk. But when the Pope shows up, he's got plaster this time around. And he says, here's your ultimate carving material, Mom. And I'm going to give you this stuff to work with. He says, I want you to carve some stuff for me. And if it's really good, I'll take it back to Rome and maybe we can put in a good word. You'll get a reprieve, get to go back to Africa. This kind of talk, which is just hot air. He wants her to carve his way, the new way, the 3D way, where you carve the whole head of the person like a bust and we can put it on a table in Rome, you know, or like a painting on the wall. But that's old news. Carving these full life-size statues, that's what it's all about. In your old world, 4D carving is, you know, a thing of the past. Of course, she just laughs at this idea. Nobody you know can do the things I can do with a simple rock, but yeah, I'll use this plaster stuff to make you, show you how to carve. And she does. She makes these dozen or two fabulous full-size busts and carvings and frescoes, and you name it. All the different techniques he shows her, or he mentions to her, she already knows with variations. So she does all this great stuff. Pope takes it right over at the guard camp. We see him an hour later with this stuff all packaged up, and he gives it off to an assistant and says, take this away right now on the next canoe and get it back to Rome, but don't have it appear in Rome, because too many people know we're involved with this tribe and they know about this famous rock carver Josie. You take it a few countries away, take it over to you know, and have somebody make it appear there. Of course, it's just going to be one of their empire connected people or families, and they're just going to be a famous person for all time, you know, this legendary carver who doesn't work much anymore, but you know, they worry about that. It's just establishing the fact that they have this incredible art that nobody else can approach in quality, right? Michelangelo level. So there is some famous name out there from this time in history who is actually Josie, right? And this is common. High-end art theft goes right through until the end of so-called heavy ET involvement, which is very recent inside my lifetime. And guess what? The art theft didn't stop for some reason. It's just kept going. You know, I could talk for 4 hours about that, you know, before I got really angry and started to tell you the details. You know? So we'll leave that and go back to more exciting rock carving that you might see on the beach or in the woods or in the river or anywhere up on the mountain. All kinds of strange rock in this area that may or may not have been worked on by humans, insectoids, reptilians, or others, for all we know, going back through the history of rock. God knows what a lot of the rock in this area was before it was crystallized. It would change form, it would become multiple forms instead of just one, but the original template would still be there as well. Speaking of templates, just to keep rambling, This is key to this. Almost any one of these you're seeing, and the 1,000 others I have sitting here, are the same thing. They're the same template. What's the template? Well, it's those baskets that were brought out of the woods for years on end. 7 or 8 years straight. We cut the heads off anything in the woods, brought it down to the river, and then knocked off one eye. So every one of these is a reptilian head. You just turn it the right way, find the eye socket. Some of them have big lizard crowns on the top, or bearded dragon look. Could be a chameleon, could be a lizard or crocodilian looking, more turtle looking, flattened snake head like a boa constrictor, more normal snake head, or a triceratops, which is a very real common lizard, and there's many miniature forms of it. Okay, dinosaurs, another subject for later, but we're looking at reptilian heads. Tens of thousands of reptilian heads. I keep saying tens of thousands as if it's about the right number for things, but it's true. These piles were just 90+% reptilian heads, and the bit knocked off their head, and very little else. So any of these ones that you can find, oh, there, that looks like half a snake head. Well, just mirror image it in Photoshop. Takes a minute. You've got an absolutely perfect looking any of the forms that I just mentioned, and a few others. So when you're working with this template to start with, and you're this master rock carvers already, well, it's just a dream come true. It's like, well, what do I want? Here, I know what. Here's the 6 or 8 of the same exact shape that are what I want. How hard do I want it? What color? What 2 or 3 colors do I want? In what proportions? This one has stuff that I can carve the white stuff off the surface and leave it behind. This one, if I apply mud into all of that and then start carving it off here, you know, we can hold it this way and that. So, a dream come true for rock carvers. More variety than you could want, and yet these reptilian head templates, which if you think about it, have a lot of natural characteristics. They have an eye, they have a mouth, they have teeth, they have scales, they have a texture and a pattern on their skin, which may or may not have been fully or partially preserved by being crystallized. How much quartz or harder material was formed inside the rock when it was made? Well, you would think that, oh, well, the teeth tend to turn to quartz a little more than... Well, that's true, but never the same twice. It's just such a fast, crazy reaction. What about snakes that were laying on top of each other? A whole bunch of insects sitting next to them, you know. Some were vaporized, others partially started to melt into each other. Every combination possible they saw of strange creatures. And then they had their heads to work with all of those natural features already built into it. So that's the template that you're looking at here. And the reason that this stuff is a little bit special is, gee, how much of the rock in the world that was formed during any of these great cataclysmic events was specifically the head of a reptile between 2 inches and 20 feet, 200 feet long. You know, well, a pretty small percentage. So it's fairly interesting to find a heavily concentrated amount of it. Probably the only place in the world where 1 million or more snake and reptilian heads were thrown into piles together. Now, this may not be true. It may have happened in many other places, and all the other places in the world where rock is being gathered up and, you know, valued and chopped up and made into shiny, perfect gems. Oh boy. It just destroyed everything slowly, right out in plain sight. A lot of it. Tragic. I have to take a break. That's so sad. I'll be right back. Right, the peace pipe and the native camp. That was just a nice interlude. Mom carved a few crazy rocks for the next few days. But it wasn't a big thing, you know. The chief wasn't doing psychedelic paintings. He was totally, you know, relaxed, older man. This is the same chief who gets killed later, even though he's, you know, an elder of his tribe, and really starts a lot of the trouble when that happens. Never mind that. We'll stay with the happy bits like seashells. No, have to be smashed up. Sorry, kids. No cowries or any of them. For some reason, they don't want it known that there was this tropical place way up in this North America thing that they're just getting going at this time. Okay, masks. Yeah, they made wooden masks and stuff and put on various acts and plays and were dancing and singing and all of it, of course. What haven't we talked about? We did the Kissing Cousins to show you history, to show you the different old Easter Island people, old world Easter Island people kissing with the higher foreheaded rounded heads, early human beings. It would literally, kissing cousins meant from the same historical era. So different monkeys, different animals, and different human beings, you know, kissing with their lips pressed together. So you'd have an Easter Island girl and one of these high foreheaded guys, you know, smooching away, and that would mean that they were from the same time. The tribe was very aware of this, because people used to go, oh, you're this old world, is really tall. But is it true the tallest of you is 10 feet tall? Well, yes, he's very shy. Okay? But they're, like I said, they were a ragtag, different mixture of people. Some tall, some very short, and in between. Okay? But slightly old world looking. A lot of them with the great big heads, and you know, really long-limbed and everything, and just built for the jungle, you know. So they were aware of that, though. They were of the same vintage. They were kissing cousins with, for example, the First Nations people in the area, who were also old world people, but all different types, you know. And I suppose the guards and stuff, the same type of people, right? More modern people, kissing cousins, right? And they were fully aware that apes and human beings were the same creature. And as soon as you went back far enough, you had only the high-headed humans, probably the oldest Easter Island, dark, tall, huge-headed, with a very distinctive nose, people, and the other, just strictly big, square skulls, like you'll see being taken seriously now for the first time. That's what made human beings able to think clearly, protection from the radiation, which was high, and able to take more punishment in any kind of a showdown or battle. You have an extra foot of skull up there, you're going to be able to win, you know, and end up in charge and become the human beings, right? The apes just stayed the same. And then the human beings' skulls evolved down. Okay? And that's simple. There'd be high foreheaded, rounded, so-called pinhead people present on the earth in the last century in circuses and elsewhere, right? The Easter Island people were segregated off to Mars at an earlier time, maybe around this time, because they were just too strange. That goes into the story of the animals and what happened and the humanoids and the terrible things that happened. But there were people around that would look at the Easter Island type people and say, no, they're too big, they're too dark and weird looking, they're different than us, we must destroy them and drive them from the lands, kind of thinking. And this is all E.T. connected humanoid problems that have, you know, that we don't have anymore, so no excuse, so behave. But these other high foreheaded type people with the really high rounded heads wearing the muumuus, 3 of them show up one day, just surprising hell out of everybody. It's like, wow, look, these are these people like we've seen carved and we've heard about, well, we've never seen them before, you know. Neither had the locals, probably. Well, three of them are around, and they communicate with them. I can't quite remember how intelligent or whatever they actually were, but they had rock carving skills and all their own tools along. Were made to do the same kind of things as the tribe was, and then they just disappeared, and I get the idea that they were taken up to Mars, where I saw some of them. Some of the humanoids up there were their type. I think of them as rock carvers, because that's what they do up there, apparently. And just more about the basics of the rock carving, I mentioned a spin point on any of these things that you pick up. Just between your fingers, the rock will turn around. Just little indents on either opposite sides of the rock. That's how it started. Anything they ever picked up and went, oh, I'll work this one out of these 50 flat black snake heads, or these triceratops heads, whatever they called them. They sure didn't call them triceratops. Anyway, you put the spin point on the rock so it can be turned in your hand, and you can work on it in your hand. When I say these people were good rock carvers, they could hold rocks in their hand and carve them quite accurately, and using a lot of force and just the right tools for the job, you know. You might have to brace it this way or that. There's all kinds of little specialist things here, and I have a few that Mom had around that she could wedge certain sizes of other rocks into, and she would sit with her legs crossed and wedge it in against her leg, and then she could put any other rock in there and hit it actually quite hard with her right hand. Well, she might be doing some other work with her left, you know, breaking up other rocks or grinding up some food or different things, right? So the spin point was first, then came the grip. If it was going to be any kind of tool, you put not one, at least two, 5-finger grips on it. They never thought any other way. It's going to sit in your hand. It's going to be every finger accounted for, nice and smooth. And if it was something they had to use repeatedly to do some kind of hard job, hit something really hard, it would have softer soapstone-y stuff in just the right places for your thumb and fingers so you wouldn't get blisters. There was the occasional cut, but not many. And the way they prepped these things with the spin point and the grip was only the beginning. From there, you carve 10 things into it. You know, the subtlety is only limited by the human mind and its artistic range, of which they had full range. Carved everything that was real, made it as accurate as they could, and all the great stories too, and took full artistic license with anything that they felt like having fun with, which was a lot of stuff, you know. So there's a few other zany, crazy things that happened along this adventure that I'm leaving out so that people will go, well, let's make the movie. Oh, well, he hasn't told us the really good parts yet, the real fun, crazy stuff, and I won't. Instead, we'll go on about how mysterious it would be if you found this stuff and kept finding the carvings of this woman in her shawl. There's hundreds of them, and here she is again with the same homely face, but now she's got a terrible red hole. It looks like her big wound on her eye is all it's red. Looks like that chief when he got hit with that. Maybe they killed her with one of the terrible weapons of the time, you know. That could be a laser beam, you know. But instead, Mom just had pink eye for a week or two. And everyone is aware of this. It spreads through the whole tribe. Oh no, Mom's eye. She can't carve right. She can't. Oh, the spiritual leader of the whole tribe. Everyone carved a rock with Mom with the red eye, and then without the red eye or whatever on the other side. And that would confuse hell out of anybody looking at this stuff. Same as these high-headed people would, because there's so many variations. And so would anything that sneakily tried to show you what the Sphinx was, or any variation of similar to what the Sphinx was, which was the triumvirate of the mammals. Men, apes, and cats were the big three, okay? The other great allies were the elephants and any large creature as large as a human being or smaller. That was a mammal that was aware of what the earth was and how life worked. Right? That was all broken up. Because the Sphinx was originally man, ape, and cat. And those were the three great allies. So you got to think about what that means. These people had no fear of Mr. Lion coming to their camp and eating them up. They had no quarrel with Mr. Lion, and he had all his prey, and they had all of theirs. Right? That's pretty different than 50 years later, when everybody was all cleared out of that part of the world, and people would be more hunting and more people moving in and more empire. It's just hard to visualize the world really just pre-Dark Ages, heading back to that great cataclysmic event. There was great balance in huge parts of the world where the way they should have been, But all this aggression kept coming back, and it didn't come through human beings. So I'm talking because I got shown this stuff. Another side memory, I was shown Petra, city of Petra, overcarved by teams of people, just like this area of the world. So they may have left all kinds of sneaky evidence there too, which may have been discovered since and destroyed or accredited to something else. You arrive there in this memory, and you're just a person, I guess maybe you've been enslaved or something and brought in, and you're looking at this carving going on in this great sprawling ancient city of Petra there. And there's straight lines carved into this rock wall going up away from you. A whole bunch of them. I don't know, a foot and a half wide. Just big chips carved straight out of this really hard material. You can see it there. It looks like it's done with a machine. It's so perfect. That must have been ETs in ancient times, 150,000 million years ago with laser beams. No, it was you sitting down there and saying, I can't do this. I've never done this before. And just the guy next to you saying, no, here, take this chisel and this hammer, put it there, put that block of wood there to make sure it's on the line, and now hit it with that once with this hammer. Out came that perfect chip. Why? The tools were super high quality. Of course, you couldn't leave the area with them on the way out every day. Everybody had to turn in their tools at the gate where the guards were. Same type of guards as our adventure. And nobody was allowed to possess such an implement outside of the Empire. So, a long, slow release of so-called technology through the centuries of tedium on Earth, totally controlled, down to the last area of the Earth. Yep, you just couldn't get those things. It would be like being a private citizen today and deciding to buy a thermonuclear weapon that could destroy the continent, and they just could not get anything that could be used. Of course, the Great Wars are all, this is when these things would come head to head. People with equal armament put into the same contentious situation would result in the Great Land Wars, a total different subject and the favorite event, apparently, of this entire empire that we're talking about. But not in many and most specific instances, and never like the movies with the heroic characters and the plans and the generals. Always just people maneuvered into positions and sent in with one side under psionic control or not. And this grim, numb, horrible slaughter goes on with a bunch of terrified people standing around on the outside of it, knocked out of their homes or their lands or whatever. This insanity goes on for a while, and then everyone just retreating and not talking about it much and not writing about great adventures that happened to certain exciting soldiers and maneuvers by these great military. It's all a bunch of crap. It's just staged. in complex ways, mind you, and with people given all kinds of options for their behavior, you know, during these events, with or without awareness or partial awareness of what ET was, or what even these so-called people, which may or may not have been people, to different. So you see, history, not complicated, really. It's very logical, but infinitely complicated. But the complete wrong story put on it by human beings, and that's just being exaggerated with every movie that backs up the whole shtick that's been up there all along. That's somebody else's story. It's not the truth. 90% of it has the wrong feeling on it. It was way more intelligent. Nobody did anything stupid or, hyper violent or crazy, or with these insane, situations like you see portrayed. Okay? It was all E.T. here. It just changes absolutely everything about it. You have to think about it that way, because everybody's been going on about E.T. being here all along, and they're right, So for me, sitting here, getting this memory back and thinking, Jesus God, that's the longest and most detailed story in my life. I didn't make up any of this. Nobody hallucinated this. Shared this part of it with some people, that part of it with others. This is one for the books. This has to come out either through me or some other people who were there, who might or might not remember all of it, who might or might not have got the psionic memory and the visit to this area, or just gone to that area, or only seen the actual psionic record, right? I call them memories, but they're actually very accurate records. It'd be like, hey, you secret space program guys, was E.T. here all along? I think, yes, they were. Oh, did they have cell phones? And in other words, did they take selfies and have them? Of course they have all these records in spectacular detail, or else they weren't here. All right? So, what else happens in this venture that's worth reporting? I missed a bunch of stuff and dropped certain storylines that might come up later somewhere. Well, there's the E.T. possession of Mom at one point, where it just takes over and shows her practically everything, but not absolutely everything, but the history of the Earth and great early events that even Marco Polo wouldn't have known the details of, right? So she may put some crazy carving into this stuff, and E.T. might have mixed his own imagery in with some of this stuff. We'll never know how much of it is real. It gets so crazy and rabbit hole. There's 2 or 3 things that are just absolutely jaw-dropping about what they said. Oh, I'll just put that in there. He's like, you've got to be kidding. There's just a sweep of history where you see things happening in the year 500, supposedly. And then again, around the time of the Second War, it's like, I think we'll bring that character back and do this kind of thing again. Just the scope of it. It's horrifying, right? And here's E.T. themselves just saying, oh yeah, 500 or 600 years from now, have a look at this. This is what happened when people tried to disclose back in 1400s. It was all they could do to get these chips into the pile. But I knew these chips were going into the pile because I arranged to have 5 million reptilian heads thrown into a certain area of the world and turn these super rock carving people loose on them in an area where I already had all my own stuff and could just come right in and influence the whole thing and just leave this stuff laying there as if, to say, oh yeah, this was Disclosure 1450s. Go ahead now and throw your little verbal rock chip pile speeches up onto the ocean of the internet, and see how well you do this time around. Okay? So this is the grim, hard reality of ET that nobody likes. It's coming from one source where you're saying, sorry, it is real. Completely real. So you have to stop this. Oh, and that happened, and this mysterious thing happened that may connect to this other mysterious thing 10, 20,000 years ago. Forget it. The adventure in this place, in the 3D world that we've been mostly caged in, most of us on a daily basis, although we all apparently get to voyage now and then. Even if you only do it in your dreams, it's somewhere else, isn't it? But this is more detailed than I want it to be. It just goes on too long, like it has now. And I run out of things to talk about. Mom being possessed, showing everything. How much of that is in here? Oh, I remember flashes and bits of it, and I look and see, is that little character again that they said was there in ancient times and then brought back during the Second War? And other places along the way? You gotta be kidding. It's really been playing with human beings like hundreds and hundreds of chess pieces and thousands of them, and moving us, groups of us around and just doing it. We've really been, no question about it, second or third on the food chain on this planet until just recently, like for real inside my lifetime, since the 40s. Well, that makes us the weirdest generation there's ever been. I hope you all can deal with that, because it gives me trouble after enough of it. There's still enough fun stuff. Talk about this some more sometime, and I'm sure that's enough for everybody. I hope you can make sense of it. And see you for the next one. It's always too much. It's never enough. But that's all we get. Happy to be living in a 4D universe yet again. Johnny Alpha, Earth 2017. Be good. Over and out.